Welcome to Business Leader Breakthroughs, where we help unlock the potential in you, your teams, and your business. I'm your host, Ryan Castle, along with Dr. Mike Ashby. We'll share insights, experiences, and stories on achieving breakthrough success in business and life. To learn more, click the link in the episode show notes or go to thebreakthrough.co. Now let the breakthroughs begin. Hey Mike, I reckon we should talk about something scary. It's not Halloween.
Okay.
It's that question that comes up at the executive table or the business owners, senior leadership team, and they go, right, so we're about to invest in some training and development for our people. What will the
Results be?
What will the results be, and what will be the return on investment?
I've found that the scariest question. As
somebody, the results?
Being able to say, well, people say, well, what will I get for this? How will I measure it? Over the years that we've been doing this, training and development, that question of, well, how will I know it's working? I go, well, look, we'll double your income, double your time off, that kind of stuff, and hope for the best. And we doubled your income and
totally.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah. It's always been quite hard to. It's the problem, and it was true as a consultant too. Somebody once said to me, so can you hand on heart say that we're going to recover at least our fees in terms of increase? Hand on heart was.
Yeah. That still leaves one hand to cross behind your back, doesn't it? Fingers crossed behind your back. Yeah.
And we were sort of confident, but could we actually put a measure on it? That was really hard. So it is always quite hard to attribute value to things, these softer skills, you might call them. We call them now core skills. But it's still quite hard to see the relationship between a direct relationship that an accountant would like between that there and that number there. So, that's a challenge.
The expense line and the profit line? Yeah. And there are so many factors involved. I think what we know from research around the learning and development industry is that a lot of training is not working.
Yeah.
Because I think if you talk to any business leader and said, if I could deliver highly engaged, highly developed people to you, do you think they would give you a good result in your business? They go, yes, of course. Of course, they're an essential ingredient. Get it?
Right.
Totally. So they kind of get it. I think some of the concern comes around research we see about just how ineffective some training is. And we've seen statistics like from the HBR that said of the $200 billion.
That's a B.
Billion spent in the US market alone on learning and development, they estimate that only 10% of it actually delivered a valuable return.
Yeah, and there's other stats like McKinsey talk about 14 billion spent just on leadership development. And that generating a similar kind of return. And if you talk to business leaders and say, are you happy with the return you're getting on training? Are you happy with the effectiveness of your leadership development training in particular? And let's focus on that rather than technical training or anything else. They'll say, no, not really. It's a bit like, well, it's not even as good as marketing, the whole thing about 50% of your advertising is wasted, but you don't know which 50. Well, it's the same. There's a sense that, well, it's expensive in time, particularly time, but also cash, and don't see necessarily that much change as a consequence. So people kind of know this, and I guess the research bears that out.
Yeah. And that's the leader's perspective, and I think there's the employee, the team member perspective. That Gartner found that only 70% of people felt they didn't have the skills to do the job that they were required to do. Yeah. That's a scary when you put those two perspectives together.
Well, it kind of worries you in terms of how they're doing their job. If they don't feel they've got the skills, they're probably not doing a very good job.
Correct, and they know it.
And they know it, and they don't feel that great.
Yeah, they're great about it. And then we've seen this high incidence of people that go to training or learning development that is ineffective around leadership training. Very low numbers, like only around 12% feel like they could then apply what they were learning in real life or in their real job based on what they were learning.
Yeah, that kind of application of skills is really a fundamental challenge. And what they describe as the biggest gap, they had some very fancy term for it, but basically they were talking about the distance between where people learn and where they apply. And the wider that gap, the more waste there is, the more loss, if you like. And the time it takes to get back to the workplace, they've already lost a whole heap of it, which tells you that the most effective learning is going to happen in the workplace.
Correct.
Tells you a whole lot of things actually, which we won't talk about in this podcast, and we have talked about at other times, about how to design leadership development programs that work and why they work. But for now, we'll just say there's a lot of money wasted.
A lot.
Billions.
Yep, absolutely. So look, this is a question we get asked from our own clients. How will we measure results or measure ROI in programs? And one of the frameworks we have referenced is the Kirkpatrick Framework. Some very deep research around how do you look at return on investment, how do you look at results out of programs. Do you want to just give us some insights into that?
It's not all that, I guess, revolutionary. What it does is it just says, look, there are 4 dimensions to it. And the first one is that the participants themselves have to actually enjoy it. They've got to have some measure of satisfaction, whether you use Net Promoter Score or course ratings or...
I think if you ask simple questions like, do you feel like this is worthwhile use of your time?
Yeah.
That gives you a pretty good indication of how much satisfaction they're getting from it.
Oh, look, have you enjoyed the program? Out of 10. Simple.
Yep, simple.
Really simple. Keep it simple.
Yep, absolutely. And the second one is about the learning. So I came here to learn these skills, and they may be soft skills, and certainly it's a big part of what our programs cover. How can we assess improvement in soft skills?
Well, again, it's a pretty simple way of you take a baseline. The Kirkpatrick model says this particular skill application piece is about the skills they should be developing through the program. So it's not other skills that aren't related. That wouldn't make sense. So you do a baseline of an assessment, a self-assessment, and other assessment, managers and others if you want, about their skill level in those particular dimensions. Like, for example, delegation's one that we often use.
Yes.
And that's a good example. So, how good are they at delegating? How good do you feel like you are, and how good do others feel you are? And then you can do a midpoint, but typically you just do an endpoint and just go, what do others think about your delegation skill now? What do you think about your delegation skill?
And what do you do if your team member comes back and goes, I think you're too good at delegation?
You can never be too good at delegation.
You can never be too good, okay.
No, I've been accused of that. It's no, I'm just enabling, that's what I'm
enabling,
saying.
helping others grow. Valid point. And I think that skill application piece, which is the third dimension, it's they're very closely related between am I understanding the skill and then am I applying it? And again, that kind of 360 framework.
That's the way.
Do you feel like you've improved in these areas? Does your team leader or the person you report to, and do the people you work with also feel like you've improved in this skill or have a good grasp of it? Yep, makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And then look, the fourth dimension is the business results piece. Look, this is the one where probably ambiguity comes in because there are so many factors involved. But again, I think there are some things that are so closely related that if we know we're getting an improvement in these things, that it would, through common sense and business acumen, know that we were getting to a better business results. Those are things like culture scores, which we might try to measure through engagement. And we actually have a whole other podcast on what are the 8 questions you really need to be asking to figure out engagement. And are you having fun at work is not one of them.
No. Not one.
So the engagement scores that are very related to your passion, your commitment at work, your willingness to put in additional effort into what you're doing. These are the kind of things that are really important from an engagement perspective. And then there's other things like retention. So how good is the organisation at retaining particularly the highly valued members of the team, the ones that they see being part of the growth path, scores around those. And then, look, there are some financial metrics that come into play as well. Whether you can attribute 100% of the results from there around the leadership development, but look, fundamentally, we're going to look to draw some comparisons, and we've been able to do that.
On that financial side, it really comes down to productivity. What we've seen happen with productivity increases is, first off, managers are more mindful about how they are managing, and they work out that they, in fact, have to do less to get more done. And yet that lovely quote from Troy at Active Engineering, and he said it's been unreal. It used to be that all the conversations about firefighting. Now the boys on the floor, he says, they're different conversations completely. They're conversations about planning and how we're going to improve this result. And as he said, he's happier, the team leaders are happier, the teams are happier, and in his immortal words, happier team means getting more shit out the door faster. And that's what it's about.
Yeah.
The productivity piece is not only faster, but faster is more profitable. And he was able to kind of reflect that in the dollars, wasn't he?
He was in very accurate dollars going.
Yeah.
Our labour rate's gone from, or our profit per labour hour has gone from X to Y, and that X to Y shift was circa like 75%.
Yeah.
So it was huge, and they were directly attributing that outcome to how that leadership development was filtering down through the organisation.
And they could trace it back. You know, he said 6 months ago, he was actually able to track it back to when we started that program with his team leaders. And you'd kind of expect that. And the big changes that happened, number one, him, you know, how he sees his role is no longer kind of command and control and driving and solving every problem. It's actually teaching his guys how to solve problems. And they then get the idea, well, they need to be planning. How do they use their time? It's not kind of mindless stuff. It's actually thinking about, okay, what happened there? What do we need to do differently next time? And I know that sounds obvious. Nearly every organisation in the world has some form of, it didn't work, but we don't know why, and we're going to do it again because we haven't stopped to think. It's really just stop to think. And he says that. He says, everybody in the organisation now stops and thinks, which that's what mindfulness at work looks like. That's what the consequence of leadership development, and that's what drives productivity. What does productivity increase? Doing stuff in a different way, faster, better, or cheaper. And that doesn't happen by accident.
It doesn't. And it's why we call it the active management program, because it's about getting into that active mindset, stop being reactive. In fact, module 1 in the program is active versus reactive.
That's right.
And when we talk to members of organisations, they very quickly identify that a big part of what they do is reactive. And moving into that active mode, going, what is the next best use of my time? If I've got another hour block coming in, what could I use it for? Yes, I could use it for the next 10 things that have arrived in my inbox or my intro or whatever, but actually I should refer back to our priorities. How does that fit with the strategic goals and outcomes and projects the organisation's working on? How can I move those things forward? Because if I move those things forward, those are the things that will create a result.
And you know, Ross at Active VMA will say it has transformed the place. It's, you know, the culture change that has resulted from that leadership development. We can see it now in the dollars. So I think it's one of those things that, historically I've felt pretty reluctant to kind of go, well, I'm not sure exactly how much improved leadership can be held responsible for this improvement, but I'll, you know, take whatever credit is offered. There is no doubt now. It is very clear what leadership development is doing for organisations. Very, very clear.
And importantly, leadership development of operational managers.
Correct.
You know, yes, we see organisations have got very highly evolved senior leadership and executive teams. But if you want to create change in the organisation that can actually implement the strategies that senior group is talking about, you've got to have great leadership skills at your operational manager level.
Totally. That's where the transformation happens, and that's true of big organisations. It's just as true of small organisations. You know, Active, I think, is about 100 people. 60. And there's about 10% of them who are on the programs. The senior guys have done it, and now the operational level are doing it, and the difference it's making, fantastic.
So you comment around, it's where transformation happens. If you've got great leadership development at your operational manager level, it's where it happens, and it's also where it stops. Because you can have the best transformation plans and the best transformation strategy, and you know, we're using this big word of transformation. It might simply be key initiatives or key goals you've got in your company, but if your operational managers don't have the skills to implement those into the business and into the teams that actually make that happen, equally it will stop.
That's where high performance happens or doesn't.
And it's that high performance in an organisation, it's that sense when you walk into an organisation, you know it's there or it's not.
That's the energy, isn't it?
That's the energy, and it's, you know, we all probably struggle a little bit to define exactly what culture is, but boy, we know when we walk into an organisation whether it's got a good one or a bad one.
And you can measure that in terms of things like engagement. That's where the business results happen, and that's the connection between those sorts of measures and the outcomes. The energy, the positive energy will translate into better results.
It will. Well, so if you'd like to know more about transforming your organisation from the middle out, as we call it, work with your operational managers. This is a very, very key focus for us here at The Breakthrough, and we have unlocked in our program design not only how you engage those operational managers and give them the leadership development skills that they need, but also how you can measure it from an ROI that actually has impact on the people and on the business.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Cheers.